Very good day to all of you. Now, today I am going to talk to you about 15 lessons I learned by writing papers in the last 1 year. So, I'm a PhD scholar and my name is Naren Selvaratnam. During the last 12 months, I wrote 4 papers, of which now 2 actually got published. So one is a non-Scopus paper and the other one is a Scopus index paper. But when I started writing these research papers, I had quite a lot of questions in my mind. When I asked questions, some of my friends helped, but some of them actually didn't say anything constructive. But then, of course, when I started doing this process, I learned a set of valuable lessons. And I thought I'm going to share these lessons with all of you as well. So here's some of the lessons I learned. Now, the first one here is, so I have written my notes here, so I'm going to go through my notes as well as I talk to you. One of the first lessons that I learned was that I can, of course, write multiple papers for my thesis. So your thesis has so much of information, and when you think of writing a paper, what happens is it has to be like a, how would I say, your paper is your research paper is like a smaller section of your bigger thesis. So if you have, let's say, this much of results, your paper should take only a portion of those results when you try to write your paper. And there's a few things that we can do when we want to do something like this. So your paper should tell a story. And the easiest way to do this is to select your results first. Now, you go through your thesis, you have so much of results. Now, in my case, I do qualitative research and I research about minority groups, discrimination, and leadership in state campuses. So, what I did was I had 4 research questions. I considered a specific research question, or maybe 2 research questions for one paper. But out of all the results, out of all the themes, I handpicked a few of the themes and then I put them on a paper to see whether those things would actually tell us a story. Now, if they do tell a story like that, I would make it further concise and then I start to build my paper. So, with that, I actually get to my third lesson, which is your paper should be well built around these findings. So, your paper now contains some of the findings that you have handpicked. So your entire paper gets built around it. And then you can also change the order of your writing as well, because now we usually, when I first started, I started by writing the paper with the introduction, then the literature, methods, and results discussion. But now what I do is I actually start with results because I already have my completed thesis. I know what is happening there. So I start with my results. I first write it in a very concise manner. And then when my results tell a very convincing story, then for that I actually start to write my introduction and the literature review and the methods. And then of course the title and everything can be aligned in similar ways so that you could have a very nicely written paper. So that is actually my 4th lesson. What one of my research methods teacher told me or lecturer told me was that think of your paper as a T20 match. So your thesis is the test match. If you are a cricket fan, think of your thesis as a test cricket match, which means you have so much of words in it. But when you think about your research papers are oftentimes original research articles, 8,000 words including references. So you can't possibly write all the things that you have found in your thesis in your research report. So like I mentioned, think of it as a T20 match. Take a few portion of your results, but then you need to add more glamour and aesthetics and details to this. So what I do is then I put more information to my research paper to make the paper more convincing and more argumentative. So that is something I think you should do as well. So with that, my next lesson is that you write your research draft very quickly. I usually write my draft over a weekend, but I then spent significant amount of time amending my paper. My first paper I amended it for 8 months because I was never satisfied with it. But I always had a rough draft which I wrote within a weekend so that I have something to work on. If not, what happens is my mind will start to tell me, okay, maybe write tomorrow, maybe day after tomorrow, maybe next week. So then you are not going to finish the word requirement. You get it done first, and then you can take ample of time to keep on amending. And amending is very important. What I usually do is I amend my paper at least 5-6 times before I send it to my supervisor to comment on it. And after commenting, I do more amendments, and then I find a journal and then send it. So that's exactly the process that I do. And the next lesson is your paper should be grounded in a solid theory. Now, this was actually a question that a remark actually once I got from a journal. When I sent my first paper, I got a remark saying that your paper must be grounded on some theory as well. So yes, you should have your paper grounded in a good theory. So your introduction to the problem, the way you explain the research problem, the literature, the methods, the results, and the discussion where you explain the implications and all of that must be well aligned based on a particular theory as well. So I do psychological research and qualitative research. So therefore, getting that theoretical alignment is super important for us. My next lesson is that you have to have your paper fit the scope of the journal. Now, I wrote one paper and then we submitted it, I think, about 3 months ago for a Q2 Scopus Index journal. Now, there, what happened was my paper is about reconciliation for Sinhalese and Tamil people and how to use university as a hub for such reconciliation mechanisms. And the journal that I selected is about intercultural communication. So my paper pretty much explains that, but then I had to further do some amendments to fit the scope of the journal. So I was told to make sure that my paper fits the keywords of the journal, and then I had to use a few keywords, and I was advised to use those keywords, two in my abstract, two in the body of my paper, and two in the discussion as well. And along with that, make sure that my paper clearly fits the scope of the journal. So don't hurry and try to get it published anywhere, but spend time to have a solid research problem, to have a properly written, identified theory, and at the same time make sure that you actually find a journal that actually fits your research. So your journal, your research report should fit the scope of the journal. So that's a very important aspect as well. And also, you can write papers based on the literature that you have collected as well. So pretty much review papers. So I have given links to some of the papers that I wrote, and you will notice that the first paper that you would see here is a review paper, not a systematic literature review. But if you have so much of literature, maybe those literature will also say something. And using that, you can write a review paper. Now, I wrote a review paper where we describe the equity and equality of minority groups and their education and leadership. So that's one paper that we wrote purely based on the literature we have collected. And you can write a small method for that review paper as well, like how exactly the literature was gathered, what were the keywords that you used, how was the data analyzed, and your findings. So this kind of papers are also pretty worthwhile because it gives a snapshot about, kind of like a summary about what is happening right now in that particular area of interest. And my next lesson is you have to take solid breaks when you write your paper. If you write your draft in the weekend, and if you are thinking of amending it again, make sure you give yourself a bit of a break so that you could have a very fresh perspective when you write when you do your amendments. And make sure you follow this same thing, and it's pretty important that you do that as well. Spend time looking for journals, but be realistic. You shouldn't think of journals that are way out of your league. I know you might think, what the hell am I saying? See, here's the thing. When I first started to writing and publishing this kind of papers, I first considered a Sage journal. I had no clue like how exactly I should approach this publication thing. And partly it's my stupidity as well. But then the journal was way out of league. And then I got my paper disc rejected. But then I spent significant time understanding how I should approach a paper, a journal as well. So because see, end of the day, I have a specific writing skill. I can improve it, but then again, I need to find a journal that I see would accept my work as well. And if you're a PhD student, you have an obligation to complete your studies in a decent amount of time. Now, I only have completed 3 years. Every time that I take right now is extra time. So then, if that's the case, we have to be realistic, because now one of the papers that I submitted in last May. It took a month to do preliminary checks and say my paper is worthy of reviewing, and then it took 2 months for reviewing the rest of the paper. After preliminary reviewing, this is like the original peer review, and it's 2 months, and still I am waiting for a response. But at the same time, I found journals with slightly shorter review times as well. So I'm not saying that you have to go for a predatory journal. No, don't go for that. But then again, you have to be very realistic where exactly you are going to go and publish. So non-Scopus papers, of course, can get quite quickly published. And you have to check for the quality of those journals as well. There are quite a lot of quality indicators that you need to go through and check. But then even for Scopus Index ones, you have to consider maybe writing the paper maybe in your first or second year, and then trying to approach it with decent amount of time so that you can complete and graduate in time, because some PhD programs have a requirement of a number of publications like Scopus Index ones. So mine, we have 2 Scopus Index papers and 1 non-Scopus Index paper. So to go to your work completion, you need to have 1 non-Scopus and 1 Scopus. So it's important that you be realistic and consider the time frame as well. And this is something I didn't think for a long time, and it hit me during the end of my second year, and then I was late. So something for you to think as well. My next big lesson was I can utilize lessons I have learned from my papers to further fine tune my thesis. See, your paper is like a T20 match, like I told. So when you add information, when you change it to fit the scope of a journal, sometimes you do more reading as well. And these readings are pretty much new readings that are not included in your thesis. So if you have that kind of information that have helped you to further fine tune your paper, maybe you should include some of those in your thesis as well, so that you can improve your thesis even further to make it more argumentative. So that is another lesson that I learned. Formatting, of course, is very important. It took me quite a lot of time to format, but more than formatting, proofreading, you should spend significant amount of time to proofread your work. And if you do a lousy job in terms of proofreading, then when your paper get published, you might notice certain mistakes here and there. So it's not going to create a very good impression. And my last lesson is you should talk to your friends always. When I was slightly clueless about how to do my publication work, I actually talked to one of my senior friends, and he actually helped me to pick up a journal and then go ahead with my first publication, which I'm really grateful for. So that is exactly the purpose of doing this video as well. Because I know if you are new to a PhD program, you might be wondering about similar things as well. But this will give sort of like a guidance as to how your paper should be designed and how it has to be delivered to a journal as well. So these are some of the lessons that I learned, but I think I should have learned before I starting to write these papers. So these are my lessons. I hope that I was able to give you some understanding about how this process works. I know this is not a fully comprehensive set of instructions, but then again, I hope that this will help you to have some clarity over what needs to be done. So thank you very much for watching my video, and please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. So have a wonderful rest of the day, and I'll see you again with a similar video in future. Thank you very much.